Hello and welcome to another episode of Crystal Confab, where me and my crystal besties confab about some of our favorite stones. And today is no exception. We are going to be discussing Labradorite, which I am so stinking excited about. I don't know about all of you, but this is one that it seems like most people are immediately drawn to in their crystal work. Is that something you each have noticed? I see a lot of nods happening.
Without
Yeah,
question, people are always drawn to the flash. You can't deny that immediate impulsive drawn to that, like, where did that come from?
Yeah, and it is a gorgeous stone. I have one here. This is from Madagascar, but it has, let's see if I can catch it. There we go. The most brilliant purple and gold and orange. It's kind of like that beautiful sunset, which, it reminds me of when you're on the beach, kind of looking out and the sun is just going down over the water, and you get that sort of ripple effect, which I know is something, Nicholas, you are no stranger to, having grown up in Florida. I'm sure you've had your your share of magical Florida sunsets. But you've worked with this stone more for boundary setting.
yeah. So I I remember my very first piece of Labradorite. I think we picked it up at like a flea market or something like that when I was in middle school, and I just couldn't believe the earth made something like this. It was just so magical. And I kind of just appreciated it for its beauty and didn't do much else with it. For a while at least. And some years ago, I was doing some intensive training with one of my teachers and mentors, and we were learning about things like psychic hygiene, shielding, protection, and how all of that kind of supports our emotional, energetic, and social boundaries too, because you can't really have one without the other. And I was going through all of the techniques as they were being taught to us, like a good student is supposed to. And then secretly, outside of my homework, I was doing weird stuff, kind of in the same vein. And Labradorite was one of those allies that just popped up for me in that time frame that just felt so right. And so I know this is going to kind of bleed over into some of what you're going to share with it too, but I find it to be just the most marvelous stone for all kinds of boundaries, whether it's energetic or spiritual or social or emotional, because it's just from the way that it's made to the brilliance of its light to the kind of deceptive nature of it doesn't have any of those pigments in it. There's something really remarkable about it. So I want to like kind of unpack this a little bit and start with when we talk about boundary setting, when we talk about protection, we often think about erecting walls. We want them to be airtight. We want to keep everything out. And there are times that is absolutely true. We want to do that. But most of the time, like you don't want to be sealed in an airtight box. There's no room to breathe. There's no room to stretch or grow. What we need are selectively permeable membranes, just like we've got around every cell in our body. And without that, we've got problems. So, that idea of a kind of a breathable boundary is so important to my own kind of energetic and emotional health and well-being that it's become a mainstay of my practice. And as someone who's been given the label empath and highly sensitive person, doesn't matter if I chose it for myself. I've been labeled that from really young in life, and you can't help yourself but identify with those things when you hear them long enough. And Labradorite was such a good tool for creating these boundaries that help me show up when I need to exercise my sensitivity when it is helpful, and also filter out the things that aren't. And if we look at the optical phenomenon that is Labradorescence, we actually see what's happening with this energetically in its structure. So, when we look at a nice, brilliant, flashy piece like this one that's mostly blue that I keep by the computer as a reminder of healthy boundaries, and some energy support, what we're looking at is an intergrowth of two feldspars that are super closely related. So when we map out the whole feldspar family, they kind of sort of create a triangle. It's like if you took a triangle and took a chomp out of one side of it where they don't mix together. And that bottom line is where Labradorite's going to fall. It's somewhere in between the composition of our sodium and our calcium feldspars. And it's like 30% one, 70% of the other, but those are numbers are really variable. And they don't have exactly the same refractive index. They don't have exactly the same values because we've got just a tiny change in them. But they form out of solution and build up these layers. We call them laminae, like from the same root as the word to laminate, to press something between layers. And those laminae can be variable thicknesses. So as light tries to pass through the stone, some of it will get sorted out. It actually gets diffracted. This is very similar to what happens like with an oil slick on a puddle. If you've ever, seen that phenomenon or just watching, a little bubble that you're blowing. It's the same kind of thing. When you see that iridescence and changing color and stuff, that's because it's the relative thickness of that one little layer that's interrupting. So the thicker it is, the more into white light it's going to go. Thankfully, with Labradorite, we get thinner than that. So we get at the really far extreme of it, we get our reds and our oranges, which are appreciably uncommon in the stone. In the middle section, we get our yellows, greens, and into the blues. And in the really, really thin layers, we get our purples and pinks. So the average thickness is in that like blue to yellow part of it. If you put a bright light behind a piece of Labradorite, though, if you force that light through at a different angle, we don't get any of that showing out. We get, gray, brown, black, those kind of drab colors. And what that's telling us is that that incident light coming from just the right angle is going to get sorted if it can't squeeze through those layers. Otherwise, it can pass unimpeded when it's not going to correspond to that. And energetically, this is a reminder that when we show up to anything in life, whether we feel, full energy or a little depleted, whether today's a good day or not, we can still be selective about what we let in and also what we let out. For folks who are super sensitive, Labradorite is a good reminder that you can still be an empathetic listener without being an empathic sponge who takes on everybody else's problems. Because in the words of advice of my dear friend Dan Lupicino, who and his words will ring true in my head every week, and I'm going to censor it ever so slightly. But he reminded me one day when I was having kind of a rough empathy kind of moment. He's like, Nicholas, I'm going to tell you what I tell all of my most senior clients. Mind your own effing business. And I thought, okay, okay. And then like the light bulb hit me like, really? All of this other stuff that's out there is none of my business. I don't need to know it. It doesn't enrich my life. I can do my job and not take other people's energies home with me. I don't have to leave so much of myself in those spaces either. There is a way that we can be selectively permeable. We can be good listeners. We can be astute healers. We can be really intuitive, but it doesn't mean that we let those external experiences rule our lives. And Labradorite is this brilliant reminder that if we find the right angle, our own light shines that brilliantly, and it filters out the noise that is otherwise going to drown us and dim our sparkle.
Oh, I love this so much, and I love that you've related this concept of the Labradorescence and these layers and how that actually works to how we experience the energy of this stone, because I find that to be so true as well. But I want to pose a quick question. Every episode we've been talking about a crystal, but also kind of sometimes having some really popular side questions that just naturally emerge. And your story kind of got me thinking, Nicholas, about, what are a couple other crystals we might recommend for people who identify as empaths? Because I think this is something that is so common in our wellness community, our crystal community. I think highly sensitive people are drawn to crystals. We are more open and in tune to those subtle energies of the stones. So, Kyle, do you have any recommendations for other crystals you might recommend for people who identify as empathic?
1,000,000%. And there's always something that I try and remember is a lack of empathy means you're essentially a sociopath, or right? Like, so we all should have a level of empathy. So just know that most people should. So go, okay, I'm normal. Everyone has empathy. I don't have to feel too sensitive. I'm actually quite normal. But for me, the biggest and the best help has been bronzite. I love bronzite as a help for empaths because it works on this level of uplifting you whilst keeping you safe and deflecting stuff away. It has this brilliant several fold effect that really is supportive. And in some of my most anxious times, I will always have bronzite with me. Big crowds, airports, when you have no idea of the situation and you don't know who's going to be out there, bronzite is always the one that I will go for.
Love that. Adam, what about you? Do you have a recommendation for the empaths who might be
Yeah,
listening?
I've got a couple of tools. The first one, obviously, is a crystal. I actually love blue amber. I find amber, we use it physically for soothing different things. So when you get the blue amber, I do find that it's very kind of spiritually protective, empathically protective, but also just helps us soothe and settle and not get swept up in an emotional storm. One thing I would either pair blue amber or Labradorite with is, that I also love essential oils. Juniper berry is absolutely amazing. Now, what we find over and over again with essential oils is what it does physically, it'll do spiritually. So, juniper berry is what we use for the urinary system. It helps to make sure the urinary system is working properly. So, my saying for juniper berry is that it allows you as an empath to be a conduit, not a container. Conduit, not a container. Because a lot of people are like, oh, I'm an empath. How do I shut it down? And just like Kyle said, it's a superpower. It's an ability we want to keep. We just want to have it you know, in a healthy level. And juniper berry allows us to feel things. Whenever I'm doing tarot readings, I have juniper berry. I feel it, I experience it, but then I let it go. And so those two together, I find, especially blue amber, very soothing. I use amber to get rid of toxic situations, but blue amber really good for getting rid of spiritual toxic situations. What about yourself, Ashley?
Yeah, I find that pink opal is one that I recommend a lot because I really think it helps you get so in touch with your emotions that it lets you sort of sort out what's yours and what's not. Because I think that's the other thing when you are that little sponge and you're picking up on all those things, you're so easily influenced and impacted by the energy that's around you. And it starts to feel like it all belongs to you. It's all yours. It's all yours to deal with. And like Nicholas was saying, sometimes you just got to mind your own business. But how do you actually know what is yours, what feelings belong to you, what you need to take ownership of and deal with, and what is maybe something you can just let go of because it's not yours? And I think pink opal is so great for that. And because this is something that empaths deal with on a regular basis, it's sort of ongoing. It's not like you just I don't know, push a button and that happens on its own. Wearing a pink opal bracelet or ring, I think is really helpful. And having that visual reminder so that when you see it, you go, oh, I need to do a check-in.
One other one that's just popped into my head, and I don't know why it wasn't my first choice, but I actually find kynites really good as well. I kind of refer to kynites as being spiritual barbed wire, and they allow the body and they're great for chakra balancing because not because they add their energy to the chakra, but they kind of put that barbed wire around and stop anything from happening. And what I love about it is this is where those kind of synchronicities of nature are amazing, is we find it in four common colors. There's the black, but then there's orange, green, and the indigo are the main colors. Now, when we think about it, as an empath, people tend to feel it in three main ways. They get a gut feeling, orange kyanite, they feel it in the heart, green kyanite, or they feel it in the mind, which is the indigo or the blue kyanite. And so I often recommend that being really great as well, depending on where you're feeling it.
I love that. That's really clever. Nicholas, what about you? Any other crystal recommendations for the empathic people who are out there listening?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to lean on my old friend Rhodonite for this because especially when we're still learning how to set effective boundaries and how to show up in meaningful ways that don't overwhelm us, we're gonna fry our circuits emotionally from time to time. It's okay. Normal human beings do it too. Not to say that anyone under the sensitive umbrella isn't a normal human being. I think we all are. There's just our range here. But when we're prone to that, what Rhodonite can do for us is give us a sense of space emotionally. It's not making the energies go away. It's not making the overwhelm just magically disappear, but it's like dropping an anchor. So when that strong current of emotional energy is sweeping by, we don't get swept out to sea with it. It gives us this anchor point so we can be present, we can feel it, but it's not going to rock the boat so much that we feel like we're in trouble. So I'm frequently, if I have to exit the four walls that are my house, I've got rhodonite around my neck and labradorite around my wrist, and we call it a good day.
I love that. Something to keep you from going adrift in the sea of emotion. Well, Nicholas, I got to tell you, a lot of what you were saying about Labradorite really resonated with me. And when we were kind of loosely discussing the things that we wanted to talk about with this stone, we were kind of realizing we had a lot of similar feelings about this crystal. And I definitely think of Labradorite as a stone that I love to use for shielding and protection. And I think it has to do a lot with that Labradorescence that you were discussing earlier. So, with our Labradorite crystals, when we're working with them, I feel like this is a great stone for that concept of shielding and protection, but also for aura repair. And I'm going to explain why. So, when we have this Labradorite and it's in our fields, that beautiful Labradorescence, which is catching and refracting all of that light in those different color rays. It's like that energy comes in and it's sort of reflected out like this really amazing energetic mirror. And so I feel like that is great for shielding and keeping us protected, but we can also kind of spin this on its head, turn it around a little bit. If we turn this around and we think about how we are sending our own energy out and it's reflected back to us, this can be really, really beneficial when people have any type of energetic leak, tear, hole, something like that in their aura. So if you've ever seen those really cool Kirlian photos where they do the little aura photos and you get all the colors, sometimes there are areas that just don't have anything going on. There's not any energy registering in the photo. And I have a story that I like to tell about this because for years and years after I broke my arm and my wrist, every time I would get an aura photo, there would just be nothing on this side of my body. There was just nothing happening in the photo. It'd be so weird. I'd have like brilliant red and orange or green and yellow or whatever, and then just no color. And this was always so interesting to me, but I knew there was like, okay, there's something I need to work on. There was major trauma that happened in this area, and I'm like, I need to work on that. So I started experimenting with different things as one does. And I found that when I started wearing a Labradorite bracelet, I felt a little bit stronger. I felt a little bit safer and more protected. I mean, this was a really, really traumatic injury. Excuse me. And so I think that connection with that part of myself, with that part of my body, with that um, boost in my confidence and connection made me feel a little bit stronger and more well and more connected. And so energetically, I was like bringing that part of myself back into the fold because it had been such a source of pain and fear and things like that. I think I was really neglecting that part of myself. And so, like that physical part of myself. And by bringing that back into the fold, that energy started to get rejuvenated. And after, the only reason I was able to keep such good tabs on this is at my shop at the time, we actually had an aura photographer. So I was getting pretty regular aura photos, like one a month, because I just thought it was fun. Uh, and so after about 6 to 8 months, I would say, I really started to notice a big difference. It was super subtle after about 3 months, where there was like a hint of color coming back. But then all of a sudden, I started to have this vibrant color again. And I really do think the reason for this, because I investigated it a lot with myself, like, why could this be working this way? Is also because that energy in my field, my aura, was sort of being reflected back into that space by the Labradorite. I feel like, your body has this energetic field around it, energy's coming out. But when there is that trauma, that stuff that's happened, I feel like sometimes it's a little weaker. But just by letting that Labradorite act like a mirror to bounce that energy back in, it kind of created this little rubber band effect, right? Where things started moving again, they started flowing again. And I think that was such a big turning point. And I started to feel more capable again because I really struggled through physical therapy and things like that, trying to regain my movement and motion and all of these things. Um, but more than that, it was just interesting to see the change energetically. I mean, I was sort of putting it into context after the fact, but I was literally just looking at these aura photos going, isn't that interesting? And Labradorite was such a companion for me during that time. When I first put it on, I didn't have the intention that that's what it would do. I didn't really, had no plan for it. It was more like, ooh, pretty rock, shiny rock. Like, I love this bracelet. It's beautiful. I would like to wear that. And then started to investigate, well, what is going on here? Because something's happening, something's changing. And I think that that is so often the case with our crystals. We're drawn to something. We may not completely understand why. And it starts to sort of get pulled together in a story or like a picture that's being painted, and we're filling in the blanks and understanding why that attraction was there.
I want to ask a question based on, you said that you popped the bracelet on your wrist that you'd actually injured. A question that sometimes comes up is, does it matter where you wear the crystal? What does everyone think? Would it make a difference, Ashley? Do you think if you only had a Labradorite pendant and didn't have a bracelet, or do you think it was actually beneficial wearing it on that wrist?
That's a good question. I ask myself this a lot because when I think about it sort of logically, I don't really think it matters too much the exact placement. I think it's more about intention. In this case, because I was kind of just like open to whatever because I didn't really have a reason. I just knew like, oh, I feel really drawn to this. I think our intuition can actually guide us to a great placement for us. So, a lot of people also will think about, well, okay, with rings, bracelet, things like that are on, your different hands, you might have your sending hand and your receiving hand. So the energy that you're sort of sending out, that you're sharing, that you want to put forth into the world, or the energy that you are looking to receive or welcome in through your receiving hand. So for me, I think that essence of rejuvenation and healing and repair and that sort of energetic mirroring was perfect for an energy that I was looking to receive. So I think it worked out really well, but I think had I just been wearing it as a pendant, that definitely could have helped as well. It might have maybe taken me a little longer to see results and understand them and that sort of thing. But I do think there is something to be said for intuitive placement when it comes to crystals and just sort of listening, and also listening to the specific tools that we feel called to and why. And Kyle, I know this is something you've shared a lot, right? Like you shared a story recently about your earplugs that you had.
Yes, exactly. I love to, if I can, put the crystal or wear the crystal as close to the source of the energy that I'm trying to work on as possible. If I can't, then it's going to be as close to I can with whatever jewelry I'm wearing, or it's going to be placed around me in my home. Like there are pieces that are on my coffee table because they're there because my husband and I are both sitting there chilling for a long time. So it's going to be working on us when we're in situ, as it were, right? There is some that I will wear when I'm going out and going to work, and then I take them off when I'm coming home because I don't need that energy anymore. It's like, if you can do it as close to what you can. And if not, just use your intention, I think is the best way.
What about yourself, Nicholas? Do you think where you put which kind of crystal or where you wear it or place it matters?
Yeah, I've got two lines of thinking on here. In the broadest sense, if we use an electromagnetic model for how crystal energy might work, and the thing about crystal energy is it's subtle energy. We can't measure it. It's not electromagnetism. It might be related to it. It might follow the same rules. We can't prove that yet. But if that is the case, then so long as the crystal is within our electromagnetic field, in or around us, then the two fields are connecting, communing, having an effect. But from a little bit more of a therapeutic model, a little bit more of like a clinical gem therapy kind of training, it really does make sense to understand which parts of us are connected to which other parts of us, both in a physical and non-physical kind of sense. I like to think of them as like therapy windows. So if I'm really trying to aim for an effect in my psyche, I can't drill a hole in my skull and pop a crystal inside my cranium, but also like my psyche isn't in my brain. It is a non-physical part of me. So what map in physical space relates to that? So, we might use the meridian system, we might use like acupoints, we might refer to the Western chakra model, maybe a more traditional Eastern system of the chakras, which is, differs quite a bit. We might also have another means of mapping those things together. So long as the map makes sense to us and can give us repeatable results, go for it. When it comes to something like Labradorite that I use for kind of a defensive in as proactive a way as possible use, I like having it on my wrist because it's in the kind of extremity of my field. I gesticulate a lot. So, it's constantly stirring those energies around. But comparing to rhodonite, which I also use for kind of like my psychic self-defense, but in a different way, I like to have that over my heart because it really has a strong emotional component to it. So anywhere in my field is great, but if it's a place that makes real good sense for a specific application, that's what I aim for as best I can.
I really like Labradorite on the hand for that sort of protection and boundary setting because it's literally like no halt, stop, which is really great. Adam, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I think proximity is beneficial, but like Kyle said, I'd have to echo what he said. Close enough is good enough if you can't get it where you need it, type of thing. So, people are always asking about which hand, and I agree with you. The hand that we write with is our projective hand. So for most of us, our right, that's where we send energy out. So think about what rings are on those hands compared to what you bring in your left hand. And if you're a lefty, obviously that's reversed in that type of way. So I think it does matter, but I wouldn't lose sleep if especially as we get into our rarer gems, and you're wanting maybe some rarer jewelry, you can't always find the perfect ring that will work on the perfect finger. A pendant would do, or a tumbled stone or something like that would still suffice, and I wouldn't lose total sleep over not having that as well. The other thing
Love
I'd like
that.
to do, just to kind of wrap up this idea of the shielding idea and what we've been talking about so far, is kind of an epiphany of another correspondence that I found with Labradorite as well. I was really blessed to be trained in tarot by someone who was actually a psychotherapist, and we did this really extensive tarot course where we would do one card a week. So we'd go there every Monday, and for 3 hours we'd talk about one card. So of course we start with the major arcana, and the first card in the major arcana is the Fool. And we learnt that night about, how the Fool is someone who, follows their own heart and takes a leap of faith and doesn't necessarily listen to the advice of others and all that type of thing. At the end of the class, I was like, why are they called the Fool? Because I think this person is the most brave person or the most daring person who doesn't try and fit into societal norms and just goes out and follows their own calling. And my teacher said, you're exactly right. But what do we say when people do that? We say, don't be foolish. And as I started to think about that, sometimes I'm sure many of you can relate to this as well. Sometimes we'll think of another concept and we think in crystals. And I started thinking, Labradorite's really great for that kind of full energy. And I think it's interesting. I have found that especially people as they start their spiritual journey, this is an amazing one for all the things we've been talking about, because when we start our spiritual journey or we get into crystals, it's very rare that our family and friends will hold hands with us and we skip down the new age path together. Suddenly we become the weirdo or the black sheep or, other like-minded names. And I find Labradorite is really good for helping you to protect you against naysayers and those that bag you as you do go on that fool's journey or you follow your own heart in that way. So if anyone is feeling like, if maybe you're hiding in your bedroom at the moment listening to this podcast so that no one else hears it kind of thing, Labradorite's a really beautiful crystal for helping to protect you and realize that you may sometimes feel alone on this path, but you're not. And there is light in the darkness in that way.
I love that you just shared this, Adam. It reminds me of this time when my mom brought my aunt to visit me at my house after I finally like had my own place, all that stuff. And I can remember my aunt coming into this office, which is, you always just see this view. It's quite wild. And she just said, "What is all this stuff?" Like, and that kind of like sums it up, right? Like when you are the weird one, when you have like the practice that looks a little different, or the tools that look a little different, or the ideas that sound a little different, it is so easy to kind of be subject to that judgment from others. And so this reminding you to work with Labradorite in that sort of spirit of the Fool, to kind of follow your own journey, follow your own compass, but also have that little hint of boundaries and shielding. I love you can kind of bring those together. And we've been talking a lot about subtle energy and how that influences us. And although we often put this in the context of crystals, we also have a lot of different planetary energies and things like that we like to throw in the mix. And Adam, I know we have a very special new moon coming up that you wanted to share with us.
We do, yeah. It's the new moon in Aquarius coming up this week. And I really love the Aquarius energy. The Aquarian sign, apart from governing that section of the people that are born around the start of the year, is very much to do with community and humanitarian. It's very much the bigger thinker, the innovative in that type of way. So the new moon, as I've said before, is the time for thinking about where are we heading in that aspect of our lives, and what kind of changes? How can we redirect the sails to do better? And I always kind of feel like the Aquarian sign is the light worker's sign. And when we hear the term light worker, people might go, "Oh, that's where I'm a spiritual healer or a spiritual teacher." I think you're a light worker when you smile at a stranger as you walk past them on the footpath, type of thing. It's how you add more light to the world, how you make this world a better place. And that's really the most pure energy of the Aquarian. And I love that Labradorite, has in its darkness, and sometimes we can feel like life can be a little bit dark at times, it brings these flashes of light. And so I think it's a really beautiful crystal to work around with this new moon. I'm simply just going to be wearing it, but I may sit outside on the new moon night and just think about, how can I make this world a better place? What can I do? How can I make more light in this world? And, I'd love to ask you a bit more, Kyle, to elaborate on this, because I know you work a lot with Labradorite for helping to bring out your own magic and bring out your own light. And I think this would be absolutely perfect for this kind of new moon in Aquarius energy. Do you know what I mean, Kyle?
1,000,000%. And let me just, excuse me just a moment. When I can, I will be tiling my bathrooms and my kitchen in Labradorite. I will do that if I can, and I know I will be doing it one day. Labradorite is my favorite of all stones. I have more of it than anything else. It is all over my home. And for me, it taps into, excuse me while I break, it taps into your own magic. It taps into who you are. It taps into what you have. Now, my weird situation is I come from a family of black sheeps. I'm not the black sheep in the family. My family is a black sheep family. My mum is literally a witch. She, I think, did the same tarot course that you did at some stage, or maybe she taught that tarot course, Adam, I don't know. Maybe a crossover there, as an astrologer and all of that. I've been raised with all of this magical stuff, but I came into it a bit later. It was in my mid-20s that mum was like, come and work for me in my crystal shop. Come and get your gemology degree, do something. I was going through a bit of a change, and I started my gemology degree when I started working in her shop. And this piece of Labradorite was the one that spoke to me so loudly. Just the blue, the flash, the simplicity, the size, the way it felt in my hand was everything. And it was like, let's just let it happen. Let's see what comes from this. Don't put too much pressure, because I was learning so much all at once. It was just absorb, They were just my intuitive sources were just telling me to absorb, and I couldn't not. I was doing classes in the store during the daytime and the evenings. I was studying and doing my classes for gemology at nighttime, and I was working full time. So I was like in practice learning about the crystals, talking to people every day. And Labradorite comes up a lot for new people, and it has the whole time through my journey. Whenever people walk into a store and they see it, it is immediate. And for me, I was absolutely no different. But I've kept tabs. I've worked with it almost pretty much consistently every week since then, without skipping one. I will take it everywhere with me. I have it with me always. And through my practice of learning how to grow spiritually and psychically, I had to not put it on hold, but like put it a little bit on pause, because I was absorbing so much science with the gemology degree. I found it difficult to do both at once, because it was like I needed to understand them separately. I needed to absorb them separately. And I think that's where like the layered energy of Labradorite really comes into effect. It's like I was able to work with it scientifically, spiritually, in different contexts, absorbing. And then as I was working, I was able to like see what I was doing as I was doing it. So I would do crystal healings. It was the first thing I started doing when I started this like journey. And I would lay people down on a bed. I would lay down a bunch of crystals underneath them. Labradorite was always prevalent and always amongst them. And I would just sense into funny areas, weird spots, aura imbalances. I wasn't really putting any rules on what it was. I was just saying it was crystal healing, and I was letting what come. And I would start to get psychic hints. I would start to hear things. I would start to see things. I would start to get spiritual messages. I would start to see spirit from the other side. And it was just one thing after another, but it just built up and it built up and it built up. And I was able to see these organic shifts happening without pressure on it, without going, oh, I'm going to actively become this amazing psychic intuitive, blah, 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 blah. It was like, let's just do this because this is what I feel drawn to do. I wasn't like anything other than just drawn. I really had no direction. I had no idea of what I was doing with anything. I was just there experiencing. And this was not a way to fill time, but just like, this is what you need to do. So I started doing it. And then it was like, okay, no more laying people down. Let's sit down. Let's do cards. Let's bring more psychic energy for people. And it was people on the start of their journey. So often people at the beginning of their journey was being drawn to me through my own experience of unlocking and growing. And you get people that are scared of their psychic senses and worried about that idea of being in their psychic self. And it was like, it's okay to be a bit weird. It's okay to see things, hear things, as long as you're in a fairly safe space. And I think that's the thing, because I was always in my mum's crystal shop when I was doing this. I was always in a really beautiful, safe space. I was always doing it in a contained way, and I was able to grow organically. And I think that's where Labradorite really teaches us to do it in a way that is safe to grow and to unlock that magic. It's not going to like force you out there and like be on the TV. It's going to go, are you emotionally sensitive? Let's unlock that. Let's grow that. Let's let that come forward. Are you really like mentally strategic and powerful in that way? Let's unlock that and bring that to the fore. For me, it's like, I'm a bitzer. I'm a chaos magnet, and I work in all sorts of ways. And so it's allowed me to do a bit of this and a bit of that and a bit of that. And if people have looked back on my career, they'll see I've done a bit of teaching, a bit of stage mediumship, a bit of psychic readings, a bit of healings, a bit of this. And that's how I work. And that's how I find comfort. And Labradorite at the front of that has always been, just do what feels natural and you'll succeed. You'll feel good about it and it will go well. But whenever I forced myself to try and do things that other people want me to do, they crash and burn, even if I have my Labradorite with me, because it's telling me I'm still trying too hard to do something else that's not me. When I just engage with who I am, and this is something that I've said, and I've never had an unsuccessful reading since I started saying this, only bring me those that can be helped through my guidance, my knowledge, and my ability. If they can't, I don't want to waste their time. I don't want to waste their money. And there's literally no point. So don't even bring them to me, because I had readings that like went nowhere, that I had to refund. Like, it was trying too hard. And it was like, I'm not here to read for everyone. I am not here to connect to everyone. Not everyone is going to connect to me. and my knowledge. And that's where our personal magic is, right? We are not meant to be palatable for everyone, but we will find our soul group. We will find our clientele. We will find the right people when we trust who we are, when we trust our own magic, when we unlock that and we are able to sit with that and be comfortable in our weird, wonderful, wacky, fabulous self. We can embrace all of that goodness. And I think that's where Labradorite fits, is that kind of void, new moon, as you mentioned, Adam. It's that newness, that freshness, that let's get things started. Let's try something different. Let's step a little bit out of our comfort zone and see what happens, if that makes sense.
It does. And I love that you kind of talked about, just being like allowing yourself to step into all these different roles and try all these different things and just be a really multifaceted person. Because I feel like Labradorite is one of those stones that it's really multifaceted. It has so many different like hats that it can put on and support you in different ways. And so I love that it's kind of like that even comes through in its energy in your experience. Was there any particular practice or way that you ended up like working with Labradorite consistently through that time period? Or was it literally, because you said like, I connected with it probably at least once a week. Was it just a matter of holding the crystal and tuning in, or was there something specific that you did with it?
Honestly, it was lots of different things. It was incorporating it by wearing it every day and ensuring that I had it on me every day. It was sitting with it and meditating with it. I would do a lot of automatic writing, was something that Labradorite really came to the fore with me. I would just hold this piece in particular, have a pad, and just see what came. And I'm not someone who likes writing. I failed English in high school, so I literally have traumatic connection to writing, but it literally allowed me to just let it out as a purging system, as a connection to my own intuition. It really unlocked so much. And I would read it and go, cool, that's appropriate. That doesn't make sense. Maybe I'll save that for later. And it enabled me to sort of see my own journey as I was doing it. And that's definitely what I was doing, if not weekly, once every fortnight with the new moon and the full moon.
I love that. So, Adam, do you think there's an opportunity to sort of connect a practice like that into this upcoming new moon that we have?
Yeah, I love that idea of automatic writing because, for those that aren't familiar with it, is basically sitting with a crystal like Labradorite. The new moon would be perfect because this is a time for kind of reflecting. It's out with the old, in with the new, kind of a reset time for reshuffling how you bring light to the world. And all you do is without kind of thinking, isn't it, Kyle? You just kind of start writing and just don't try. It's not like journaling where you're thinking about, okay, what is the answer to this question or what am I pondering? It's just kind of, and it takes some practice. The first time you might be like, what do I write? Kind of thing. But just sit with it and just maybe focus more on the crystal than what you're writing and see what actually comes out. That would be a really beautiful way to use that. But I'm also getting the feeling kind of thing as we're talking that I think Labradorite, for most people as they start their spiritual journey, maybe, we all need a piece of jewelry. I think it might be a good one to help guide the fool or the novice or the beginner or at any level when we're ready to kind of go that next step. It could be a good piece to actually have on us, I think.
I think you're right about that. And you touched on also, Adam, this idea of intention setting for this full moon. So I'd really love to invite everyone, whether you're listening or watching, to just drop a comment and let us know what intentions you are setting for this new moon. And I would like to invite anyone to share one last thought or tidbit about this crystal before we go, Adam.
There is a myth that I've heard, and I'm always nervous when we've got Nicholas with us because he's a crystal historian who seems to research much more than I flippantly as a Gemini skim across and go, yep, okay, I'll retain that. But I have heard a myth. Labradorite is named after Labrador in Canada. And there is meant to be an Inuit myth that said once a great warrior found some Labradorite, rammed his spear into it so hard that it released some of the lights, and that created in the north the aurora borealis, and I guess we could also compare that to the aurora australis down here in the south as well. And so one of my favorite ways to cleanse this crystal, rather than using one of the elements or the sun or the moon, is if you do have the opportunity to be near the northern lights or the southern lights, to actually put it out under that light as well.
That's really, really cool. And maybe not accessible for everyone, but still really cool. I love how Adam always brings like, especially in your book with the obsidian, if you can take your obsidian to a volcano to cleanse it, that would be
Why
gets me,
not?
it gets me every time. And like, if you can, obviously, it's going to be optimum. But you know, if you can't, just under the new moon, Labradorite gets a really beautiful cleanse as well. I want to quickly talk about golden Labradorite. Many people may not even know it's a thing. It is colorless yellow Labradorite that's also known as bitanite. And this piece comes from Queensland. And I just had to show it off as a unique connection to this wonderful mineral. And I find it really beautiful for just illuminating how we can be a better leader in our own lives. That's where I really love golden Labradorite.
Mm. What about yourself, Nicholas? Any extra ways you like to use Labradorite?
So at like peak, we'll say volume of stress in 2020, 2021, when I was writing Crystals for Psychic Self-Defense, I was doing a lot of experimenting, just trying to find ways to effectively hold space for others in a time that was just so unprecedented. We didn't know what was going to happen tomorrow, let alone later in a given year. And one of the ways that I incorporated Labradorite was a layout that I have in the book that is a seven-pointed star of Labradorite that you just stretch out and lay inside. The number seven has a lot of significance that works, but I also arrived at it by trial and error. I tried I tried fewer, I tried more, but seven was the number that like really clicked. And even if you've just got seven inexpensive tumbled stones, it's such a really great layout that you can do. Just try to get them kind of equidistant, lay inside, visualize this beautiful, vibrant, iridescent energy of Labradorite surrounding you, permeating you, and it's really going to strengthen all of the magic, that boundary setting, that protection that Labradorite has to offer.
I love that. And actually, I've noticed over the past episodes, you seem to be really into putting crystals around the house in different places. We've talked a lot about having Labradorite on us. Is there any tips you maybe have for Labradorite? Is there somewhere in the house you'd put it?
There is. So for me, this comes down to a specific practice that I love to connect with Labradorite for enhancing intuition. So I like to have it nearby if I'm doing scrying, particularly water scrying. So I have a small, shallow, black soapstone bowl that I will fill with water. Sometimes I'll put a couple drops of a crystal essence or elixir in there to kind of add to that mystical, magical quality. And having that Labradorite nearby, or sometimes literally just kerplunked right into the water, is, I think, something that enhances that connection to our psychic awareness, our intuition. But in particular, I found is really useful for scrying divination. So if there's somewhere that you like to just sit and contemplate, like I think sometimes we sell ourselves short. We think like, oh, I'm just staring off into space, right? And an idea comes to you. I think sometimes we're just picking up on subtle things in our environment. Like scrying is kind of being really intentional about zoning out. And so I would love to invite everybody to give that a try. If there's a place that you like to just sort of zone out and get a little bit more intentional with it, maybe try scrying into a candle flame, into a dish of water, something like that, and then place that Labradorite there just to sort of enhance those vibes.
And another perfect thing to do on the new moon as well. Well, if you don't have Labradorite, I think we've actually kind of given you a very good reason to go get yourself one. And you have it, if you haven't used it for a while, it's time to get it out of the collection, dust it off, and start working with it a little bit more. Now, as you know, here on the Crystal Confab, each week we explore one crystal, but you're going to have 7 sleepless nights now because next week we're not exploring one crystal, we're exploring 12. Now, why? I'm not going to tell you why, but all I can tell you is that you're going to love the episode. Until next week, we'll see you then. Blessed be.